Hello, I'm David Kain, president of Kain Automotive, and thank you very much for joining me today for my interview with Peter Leto, the CEO of a new company called Foundation Direct. And Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. Please give our viewers a taste of your background. That would be really helpful for us today.
Very good. And thank you, David, for having me. It's always a pleasure to, if we can say we're seeing each other right now, at least virtually, always a pleasure to see you. As you mentioned, my name is Peter Leto, and I'm CEO of Foundation Direct. Prior to joining Foundation Direct, I spent 12 years at Google, where I had the privilege of starting Google's automotive retail team. In 2011 till 2019, I was part of that team. And that team was responsible for being not only the face to Google for dealerships, pounding the pavement, attending industry events and regional road shows, and really looking out for the dealer's best interest. How can Google help dealers succeed in their business? But we were sharing those best practices and bringing those conversations internally to our senior management and our product teams to try to develop better solutions for that group. And so, as you can imagine, and as you know the space better than I do, it was a really awesome experience for us to be at the forefront there and to really help Google become a better resource to dealers than where we were at the beginning. In that role, we worked with OEMs, we worked with dealers, we worked with auto groups, we worked with the agency partners. We learned a lot from industry partners like yourself, David, and it was truly a very unique time. It was very fun.
Good. So you were part of the foundation of when you think about just ask Google, they'll have the ideas that you're looking for. And I think probably if you look at the shape of how Google had evolved over the years, and I always like to go back to the Wayback Machine on Google, the website archives. And if those viewers haven't seen that, it's kind of fun. Go to Google, type in Wayback Machine, and you'll be able to see where Google will do a screen capture of the historical perspective of websites. And it's kind of fun to see that. But Peter, it had to be difficult for you all to branch out. Very comfortable environment. You have paternal leave if you have a child, and you have a lot of good things that are going on. I'm not going to suggest that Foundation offers those same exact benefits, of course, but tell me a little bit about what caused you all to be brave enough to exit and start something really from scratch.
Yeah, and you mentioned those leads, David. It's a great company. We still have, all four of us have a tremendous amount of appreciation and gratitude towards Google. And I'm still working with Andrew and Tim, our founder and co-founder, on some of those perks as well. But they're bringing the culture over to Foundation Direct. Not sure how that paternity leave will work, but in COVID, I'm not sure that another kid is in the works.
Sure.
It was funny. Again, we're really grateful for our time at Google. We got to see it all. We got to build a business internally. We got to understand how Google builds businesses and how they think. And we're passionate about the space. We had the pleasure with other industry partners, of course, of teaching dealers what digital was. What does it mean? What is search? How does it work? What is display, programmatic, video, etc.? We then transitioned the industry collectively, not just us, I mean collectively, to why digital matters. Why should I spend my first dollar on digital versus traditional? And I would say around 2016, we stopped hearing the request for what is digital and why, but really got into the how piece. I get it. You don't convince me anymore that my customer's online. Don't convince me that I have to spend money here. How can I be doing this better? What questions should I be asking my agency partners? And truthfully, this how question is what motivated us to do things differently. Don't misunderstand me. There's some really great partners in the industry today looking out for the dealer's best interest and doing things really well. But we saw a lot of opportunity for improvement in general. And instead of just talking about what to do and how to do it, we really wanted to show people. We really wanted to get in the trenches, to roll up our sleeves and show people how digital and specifically advertising via Google platforms would really help them with business outcomes and become more profitable.
So when you look at Foundation Direct, I'd just be curious, and I think it's probably a good idea to share what you feel like makes a difference in an ad agency, because it's something, and not, now that we're shifting, it's not just marketing or digital marketing, it's literally advertising, marketing, promotion. It's all kind of spun together. And I trust you guys probably aren't doing TV commercials or radio commercials or direct mail pieces, but anything that has to do with digital advertising, marketing, promotion, and such is all within your all's repertoire, if you will. But tell us what you feel like makes a difference. If you think of the mission statement, our vision and goals, what about foundation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll cover off on three principles, but in short, to exactly your point, David, we only advertise across 4 platforms today. It's Google and YouTube, which of course YouTube is owned by Google, Facebook, and Bing, of course, to a lesser extent, but recognize that Bing does have a place in the market. We don't advertise anywhere else. And we don't advertise anywhere else because we actually don't think you need to be, with the way that the Google and Facebook platforms can reach literally every customer across multiple devices, across each, Google has 8 properties, now 9, I think, that reach 1 billion people. You can literally hit a customer at any moment right within their ecosystem. And you don't need to spend outside of these areas. I feel really bad for dealerships. I remember standing up on stage, especially in my early days, showing pictures of traditional mediums that still matter. And then you show the Lumascapes of the digital platforms, and you show hundreds of logos and partners. And as a dealership, you're going, how do I hit all these customers? Where do I even begin? I think from 2011 till now, companies like Facebook and Google have said, look, we're making this a lot easier for you. We've connected our ecosystems. We can hit people across desktop, tablet, mobile devices, and all of our properties talk to each other. So if I'm a customer who went to Google and then I went to YouTube, I know exactly what you clicked on Google.com. I now know you're on YouTube, and I can continue that conversation with you. That's something we're very passionate about, and we're finding actually marketing isn't as difficult as what many of us think it can be. It can actually be quite simple. In fact, many dealerships can probably start to do it on their own if you agree with the philosophy of which we're sharing in the industry, which is you don't have to be spread your advertising dollars across multiple different platforms. And I would say we care about 3 things at Foundation that sort of differentiate us: transparency, alignment to best practices, and automation. And I'll follow your lead, but I'd be happy to go into each of those points or go in a different direction if you prefer.
Yeah, wow. So, it's so funny. I was, as we talked before this conversation, things that we wanted to talk about, and we went through them. But as you expose your all's philosophy and the things that you guys are really focusing on with dealers, I think it's important, and you've almost opened up a great opportunity that might take the whole course of this interview in another direction. So let's dig in just a little bit deeper, because you got my curiosity going. So four different areas, and let me make sure I got them right. So Google, let's give the YouTube, the little the sun, the video portion of Google. So Google, YouTube, Facebook, and to some extent Bing. And I know that's hard for you to say after all the 12 years at Google, but certainly a good opportunity. So let's dig into that for just a moment. And in the spirit of your principle of transparency, why don't you mention the Auto Traders, the Cars.com, the Car Gurus, the True Cars, and all of those third parties that are out there, and what that space looks like, and what we should equip the audience who's listening to this, because they'll be blown away and they'll be like, hey, what do you mean? I got to stay on those guys, because that's what brung us. And let's roll the tape back to, say, 1997, when I first was at the dealership and we were doing digital advertising and marketing. It was only Automotive at that point in time. So it was great, because if we wanted to be on that just one area, now you've narrowed it to 4. We do digital marketing 20 groups, of which you've helped me host even at the Google headquarters and such. And you recognize the fact that those guys, if you look at their vendor spreadsheet where the 20 members of that group share, there's over 150 companies that they're writing checks to every month for any number of activities. So tell me where all those other companies align, the third party viewpoint, if you will.
Yeah, and it's fair, and I'm laughing because I could go on and on forever. So you're gonna have to hold me accountable. You know I go on and on forever in general, but this is a topic I'm really passionate about because what I've noticed while I'm on this side of the house, I'm not just on stage and as I had the privilege at Google to represent the company and just talking at people, I'm getting to work in the trenches more on this side, which is something I'm excited about. And I often find when I talk to dealerships, I'll talk about, well, what's your digital budget? And the third party ad spend, the lead providers that you mentioned, aren't even part of that conversation usually. I'll say, well, you're spending this, does that include your third party leads? Oh no, that's a separate bucket of money. And I kind of scratch my head and say, well, why? Well, that's strictly my lead gen and so forth. I would like to rewind like you did to 1997, and I'd like to take a page out of our founder's book, Andrew Diffenderfer, and ask us to just look at what we used to do with the travel industry. When online came about in 1997, and we'll call it till 2008, I remember my first moment at Google. It was my first job I had to travel for. I used services like Kayak. I used services like Expedia. I don't know if you used to use those services as well, David. But they were kind of first to the market. They understood that digital and the websites were going to be really big. They came up with a really innovative way to help consumers access information. And, as Kayak was, instead of going to Delta and United's a website and Americans, you can just come to Kayak and see all of the different flight options for you. And candidly, as a consumer, I was living in Chicago working for Google at the time, and American Airlines was a terrible website, but one of the best airlines in that area to be able to get kind of anywhere. Kayak knew that, and they recognized an opportunity, and they built a really great product. But as time went on, the airline industry, as well as the hotel industries, realized, wait a minute, we can do this a lot better, and we can offer our customer a lot more. If Peter goes and books through Kayak, I'm not necessarily getting the ability to select my seats as well as I could be. I'm not getting updates on the delays or notifications of what's changed on my flight, or the ability to type in, my meal needs through those websites. I'm not interacting in addition to the ability to track my bag like you can today. David, I think you and I are both Delta travelers, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Love Delta Airlines. Is it fair to say you book directly through Delta today, or do you use third parties?
It just made it so logical, and I do have that direct connection, and it's a trusted resource now, as opposed to when you go back to Expedia, for example. You call Expedia and you say, I need to cancel that room. They say, well, call the hotel direct, and you call the hotel, and then you're in the pinball machine. And
exactly. And I'm not saying, Kayak and sites like that are still useful. You still might go to them in a comparison model of, yes, hey, let me go look at this. I can't travel Delta because this isn't a Delta hub. I'm going to this random location per se. Let me go look at this, or what is the price points here? But that's what it is. It's more of a comparison tool versus a shopping tool. And I use that analogy with you because that's exactly what's happened with third parties. And the third party leads in our industry at the time did things that better than what the OEMs were doing and what the dealers could do on their own. But dealers understood that, this thing called the internet was not a fad, and they started to improve their websites. They started to improve their process. But where we haven't seen the industry shift is to shifting the ad dollars from those third party leads and capturing this directly through platforms like Google and Facebook. And what always is interesting to me is when you look at advertising, there's three things I always consider: who can help me reach shoppers, who can do so effectively, and who can do so efficiently.
Yes.
And if you'll allow me, I'll talk about each one of those points very quickly.
Yeah, please.
On the reach side of things, we have in our industry this preconceived notion that a third-party endemic site, I'll call them endemic sites if that's okay, is the most logical place for me as a dealer to advertise. Why? Because they take my inventory, they list it on their website. Their website's all about automotive. And so, of course, naturally, when a consumer is looking for a car, they're going to go to this auto-specific website and look for information. Third-party research from ComScore will show you that these endemic sites on average will reach about 30 to 40% of in-market shoppers.
So call out what the term endemic means and give the audience an example. So endemic, to some people might be Auto Trader, it could be Kelley Blue Book, it could be cars.com, or it could be Edmunds.com. What are you referring to?
All of the above, honestly. Any partner who you provide them an inventory listing, they list your inventory on your behalf, and they sell you back a lead.
Yeah.
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 What I find interesting here is, great, you're on, pick a partner. I don't want to pick on anybody. You're on Car Gurus. You're on Car Gurus site. Car Gurus will reach about 40% of in-market shoppers. That means people who are going to buy a car in the next 90 days, 40% of those people might end up on a Car Guru website. That's good. Sure. But Google will reach 90% of those people, 90% of in-market shoppers. And they'll reach them multiple times across their platform. What happens if I'm a shopper and I go to Car Gurus and I'm on that site and I leave? The best that Car Gurus can do at that point is retarget or remarket via cookies, right? I went to the website, I leave the website, there's a code that's placed, and ads can follow me across the web. Mm-hmm. That's allowed today. Depends on how you feel about privacy in the future. That might be eliminated. Sure. So now you have no value beyond what Car Gurus can reach. A platform like Google, again, can reach you across YouTube, Gmail, Maps. As you go across Google, there's 9 properties that they can continue to interact with you on and continue that messaging. And so what I'm trying to tell dealerships is focus who can reach these shoppers and do so multiple times, which gets into the effectiveness side. On the effectiveness point, David, you probably know this better than anybody, but dealership websites are 4 times more likely to convert a customer from interest to a sale than any other platform. So the question becomes, if dealership websites are the best leveraged asset for the consumer, why aren't we trying to drive as much traffic as possible to the dealership website? Dealers, it's in their best interest and will be most cost effective for them to capture this directly. And so that's something we talk about from the effectiveness side. In the interim, according to ComScore data, the Car Gurus of the world, the Auto Traders of the world, the KBBs of the world get 50% of their total traffic from Google properties alone. So if you hear what I'm saying to you, they go on google.com, they pay for advertising, they have good organic presence, they attract all those customers to their websites where 50% of their total traffic is coming directly from Google, and then they charge the dealer for that traffic.
Sure.
If the dealer just showed up on their own, they would reduce their marketing spend in general, save on what they're spending in third-party leads, and be more cost effective. And that's where we get into the efficiency story. I'm happy to go into more detail, but if you look at lead rates and if you look at cost per car sold, you'll see that ads from Google search engine marketing, for example, that's the paid ads, as you know, are going to generate a 250 to 275 cost per sale. But when you factor in, third-party leads, you're looking at $700 or $1,000. And This is just simple math where we look at the state of the economy. We look at every dealer being challenged to think about profitability. Margins are suppressed across profit centers. We're in a pandemic. How do we save money? I look at it from the marketing lens, which isn't the only lens, but that's what I do. I do marketing, and I say, you can cut your third-party lead spend, reduce it significantly, and just invest by being there on platforms like Google and Facebook.
So, wow. So once again, those three areas that you're looking at is reach. Go ahead.
Effectiveness. And efficiency.
Okay. All right. So that covers transparency, obviously, from big standpoint. So there's a couple of kinks in the armor I want to talk about. My website converts at 2%, so great that you're bringing me traffic, but and I can convert 25% of those into a buyer if they become a lead, a phone call, or some actionable opportunity. But you're my advocate for improving this whole link system, if you will. What about my website? What role does foundation play in improving the efficiency of my website? Because I love the fact that I'm going to get more organic traffic and more effective or efficient spend on my marketing budget through Google, Facebook, and YouTube and Bing. But at the same point, if I bring them here, are you advocating that you bring them to my website, or is that just one of the entry points to the CRM, if you will, or to call the dealership? Or are you saying Google My Business? My perspective is this. I don't care if they come to my website. That's great, and I can run them through that system and I can convert them. But when you think that 97, 98% of the people who visit my website don't convert,
Yeah.
they may show up, they might call me, in some form or fashion. But are you trying to get them to transact at the website or convert at the website, or do you care where they convert? Because me personally, if I'm a dealer, if they'll convert at a park bench, if they'll convert at a Little League field, if they're convert in the grocery store parking lot, I don't care.
Yeah.
I just want the net effect.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll answer it a few ways. I mean, your example reminded me of Domino's Pizza, which just a few years ago was completely uncertain as if they would survive, and now I think they offer you 15 different ways you can order a pizza, right? Through your watch, through your car, through online, by calling, by texting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So to your point, put the customer first and let the customer decide. That's easier said than done. And of course, a massive organization like Domino's can have an advantage of how to figure that out. Let me start by caveating, David. I like to stay in my lane. I'm not an expert on websites, just to be clear. Our job at Foundation is how do we help you reach the most qualified customer and ensure that whoever gets to your website is more qualified through what we advertise than maybe advertising without us. One thing we like to do that's hard for a lot of dealerships is create the transparency in advertisements. So for example, to exactly your point, meet the customer where they want. Time is our new currency. We've been saying that for a long time. At our time at Google, we say it now. As a consumer, how can you help me save time? That is what I value more than money. And from a business or dealerships, I would argue they should care the same. If I can reduce the amount of time my salespeople have to spend with the customer answering questions that the customer can get on their own, in theory, I should be able to reach more customers and speed up the point of sale by focusing on the right ones. And I share that with you because I think it's the latter answer of, well, it's a combination of both. Give the customer as much information as possible. We encourage our clients to write an ad for every single VIN that shows payments, in stock, regional offers, you name it, mileage, whatever we can to just help the customer bring the VDP page directly to the customer. Give them as much information as possible. Sure. On the second point of should I bring them to my website or wherever else, you have to be present in the areas where the dealer will, or where the customer wants to interact with you. Yes, the Google My Business page is pivotal. Yes, the Facebook business pages are pivotal. Yes, your website is pivotal. But this gets into another measurement conversation. To exactly your point, 2% are converting. If we're optimizing all of our media and all of our decisions based on what 2% of customers are doing, how do we justify that? What about the other 98%? And so I think this is you're bringing up another challenge where our industry is faced with, which is, the proper measurements and how do we measure? And candidly, I don't think anyone has the perfect answer. I don't think Google does. I don't think Facebook does. I'm not pointing a finger at either. I was at Google and I struggled with this. Sure. But I think there is some combination of, if I look at my holistic marketing strategy, to take a page out of, Bob Lanham at Facebook, I agree with him here. If we look at my holistic marketing, here's how many cars I sold. Here's my cost per car sold in total for my marketing. Or here's my marketing spend. Here's how many cars I sold. Here's my cost per car sold. How do we then look at that number and just benchmark against ourselves to say, this month I spent $700 per vehicle sold across all my marketing. I looked by channel. Here's what it was, number of cars sold divided by spend on Auto Trader. Here's what it was on Google. Here's what it was on Facebook. And once we start to see which platforms are driving the most efficiency, how do I then say, if I were to take some of the money from my higher cost marketing efforts to put it towards my lower, could I decrease my overall marketing? I think that's a factor we have to take into consideration in addition to phone calls and leads. Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's kind of that conversation that really is confusing to a lot of dealers is we hear all the time. And one of my digital marketing 20 groups, we were having a meeting, and the guest speaker says, quit counting leads, quit counting phone calls. It's broader than that, and I understand it. But at the same time, we coach on lead handling, call handling, business development aspects, the customer and equity, the lease renewals, and those tangible effects. And there's a lot of distrust of car salespeople, but there's also a lot of distrust in the advertising industry, particularly when someone says, for the last 23 years, it's always been about the tangible lead, the call, and the walk-in. And now you're sitting here saying, well, let's look beyond that. Well, it's hard for me, forgive me to all the advertising companies out there, but I've never been able to buy groceries with a click or an impression or anything of that nature. It always comes down to, how do you follow this all the way into selling a car? And we used to say that to our teammate at our family's dealership. So I worked there for 20 years. And I used to say to a teammate, if you're not selling a car, you better be helping someone who is selling a car, because you got to have a tie back to some level of transaction, whether it's selling a part, selling accessories, selling services, and so on and so forth. So foundation, as I think all companies in this line of work have to effectively drive sales and profitability into the dealership, or it's just, for lack of a better phraseology, it's just vapor. And we've got to become more focused on having that measurable impact across that. And I know, so let's go back to your all's principles: transparency. And what was the second one?
Transparencies, aligning to best practices, which I can explain in automation, machines, not people.
Yeah, if you could, let's talk about aligning to the best practices.
Yeah, and real quick on the transparency piece, if I could just say a few things. Transparency for us, in addition, means to a dealership: do you own your account?
Yeah.
Do you have access to it and control the data from it? If you fire your partner today and you sign up with a new partner, is that your account? Can you take it with you? Do you understand what you're being charged for? What margins your partner is making or not? Everyone has to make money, I get it, but is it a flat fee? Are you being told to spend in certain areas because that's a high margin for a company? Do you really have a breakdown by product of where you're advertising, and can you prove that because you have access to everything? So that's a little bit of the ownership and performance.
Yes.
Aligning to best practices is a few things. In its simplest form, Google and Facebook have done a great job, in my opinion, of just telling dealers what best practices are. David, Facebook has the playbook, dealer playbook. Google has the guidebook 1.0 and 2.0. And they've literally just given the keys to the castle to anybody who wants to execute. If you want to maximize our properties with what we know of your business, here's how to do it. So that's table stakes for us, specifically from the Google side. Our COO, Ashley Lepchek, wrote the first one. We were involved in the second one while we were still at Google. But it's just, can you align to the best practices? The second thing is, what about the dealer's best interests? Probably talking a little loosely here, but when I left Google, when I was in charge of the auto retail team, 90% of dealers were advertising new car. Do you know how many were advertising fixed ops and used?
Zero.
I mean, pretty much. Fixed ops got better. We had about 20% of dealers advertising fixed ops. And when I say advertising, I mean spending $1 on it. I'm not even talking about spending to its potential. And less than 10% were even advertising used cars.
Wow.
So when I say best practices, Mr. and Mrs. Dealer, you have multiple profit centers, and I'm not the expert that you are, but I believe these make you a better margin than new car. So why aren't we advertising those? Why aren't we listing our inventory in the same way you're doing so on the new car side, instead of relying on some of these third parties? We align to best practices with our tech internally. We're not cutting corners. We're getting inventory feeds live every night. We're not scraping websites. That makes it a better experience for the customer because they know this car is in stock. We're getting dealer parameters in place. We'll take care of the best practices. That's what we do. David, you're the general manager of the store. You're maybe the finance manager. Just tell us how you want to price your vehicles, because that's what you do best. Sure. We'll marry our best practices with your pricing. to make sure that we give the customer the best experience. And we'll write a VIN for every ad for every VIN on your dealership. So that's what we mean by best practices. It's not just about what does Google say, but how do we bring in your parameters as a dealership? How do we write these ads in a way that advertises every vehicle in stock, an ad for every vehicle, and how do we do so in a manner that has representation across profit centers?
Wow. And the last one is automation, because if you're going to do that, and I'm a 50 inventory store, 500 or 1,000, there's a lot of work that goes into that. So obviously automation and your programming and your technology have to work very effectively.
Yeah, and automation is a fancy buzzword, and the promise of automation is much more than what it can do today, in full truth. But we really believe, when we were at Google, we'd say, let go and let Google. There's a lot of partners today who build proprietary bidding algorithms that sit on top of what Google and Facebook know about a customer. And they feel like with their proprietary algorithm and what they know of a customer, they know more than a Google or a Facebook does about the customer. I can promise you, when I sat in those seats at Google, we tested this across several partners, and they never worked as well. Let Google, let Facebook let go. Use their systems to automate advertisements. Today, so many partners are manually creating ads, and you don't typically see ads for every vehicle in stock because that's not possible for a human to write those.
Yeah.
So automate that process. That is possible to do. A machine can do those. Those are X's and O's and inputs that the machines are able to do by kind of limiting the human interaction and investing in the tech and the promise of tech. Instead of reporting on what happened, what we're able to do is have a meeting with you, David, as one of our customers, and say, this isn't what happened last month. This is what we did about what was happening last month.
Yeah.
And that's a different conversation. One is one you can actually take action on in real time, and the other one is reporting on what the weather was yesterday. That's of no benefit to you or I.
Yeah. So it's so interesting, and you bring up Bob Lanham, and both of you and I have a good relationship with Bob, and he's so oriented to what works in Facebook, and even broader than that. And I think it's impressive that guys like you and Bob have gone outside of what your silo could have been and just focused on yours and just look at the broader industry. And certainly it is something that, you look at the OEM's perspective, you look at the tier 1 view, the tier 2 view with the ad associations, and of course the tier 3 at the dealer level. We've primarily focused on the tier 3 level, and certainly there are conversations to be had in the future, and we will dig into that because your whole company is skewed towards what's working now. And what'll be interesting is as we go forward 5 years, 10 years, the conversations we're having now, people will look back and say, oh, that was cute. That was quaint. That's what Peter and David thought of the industry back then.
Or were they wrong? Yeah.
Their prognostications were way off. Certainly we won't confuse them with Nostradamus. But the truth is it will evolve and it will change. And I think great companies plan for that flexibility, that evolution to occur. And Peter, thank you for giving us the time this morning. We definitely will get back together and we'll continue the dialogue. It'll be fun to go through some of your all's philosophies and talk about those other areas. But this has been a real pleasure. And if there's anything in closing you'd like to say to wrap up, because we talked about so many different topics and how they can get in touch with you and how you operate. I'm obviously going to provide your contact information, but wrap it up for us and tell us what we need to remember about this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, David. It's been a pleasure and appreciate everything you do for the industry. You're a guiding light in our industry, and I mean that. Look, I'll keep it neutral with the wrap up, but the COVID has changed the game for us, as we know, and I think it's here to stay in terms of consumers, regardless of we get out of this in a year or 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever you might personally believe. The truth is, there's been more interest now than there ever has in car ownership. And that's a good thing for our industry. New car, used car, whatever that means, public transportation, ride sharing, et cetera, is not something that's top of mind for consumers today. And it probably won't be for a while. And that's coming directly from companies like Facebook and Google, who have a great pulse on the industry trends. I just encourage any dealership, whoever you advertise with, make sure you're advertising cross profit centers today. The used car opportunity is obviously hot right now with the state of the economy. Inventory is low on the new car side. You got to get that inventory out there. And I encourage you to try to capture those customers directly, not through the kayak model that I mentioned earlier that we saw with third parties, but by actually listing your inventory yourself on your own websites and driving traffic to your own websites and controlling that conversation so customers can reach out to you in that way. And I think if you do so in a manner that helps you get your inventory out there, that you have transparency into, that you can see the performance, and you have someone at your dealership who can hold people accountable, you're going to see the fruits of what digital advertising can do. And you're going to start to see that marketing isn't a cost center. It's actually a profit center. When you get into digital marketing, you'll get to a point that for every dollar I put into search engine marketing, it yields me 5. How can I maximize that opportunity? And I would argue most dealerships see it as a cost center today, not a profit center. So try to take these steps and transition to the new way of thinking, if you will, over time. If we can do anything for you, you can reach me directly at peter@foundationdirect.com or email info@foundationdirect.com. And David, feel free to give out any further information on me that you'd like to share with your listeners.
We sure will. And Peter, thank you very much. Please give your colleagues a shout for us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot for joining us today. Bye now.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.